So I do work for Google, and I'm going to take you in the next sort of 10, 15 minutes through what I see as the challenges organizations face, small and big, and some of the technologies that we at Google are seeing and helping sort of to develop. And that's why, the past 10, 20 years, we've been talking a lot about technology, and we're, I guess, feel like we're neglecting a bit sort of the human side. And that's why a lot of the digital transformation that sometimes you hear about doesn't really go down well in organizations big and small, particularly for that reason. Because with all the hype of machines and everything, we're still very much dependent on our, human ingenuity. So let's start us off and introduce sort of my talk regarding the 4 main categories that I'm interested in and I work on. So I focus on technology, I focus on people, business and organization, and the different intersections between them, which I find fascinating. Recently, I've taken up the studies of neuroscience, so I try to see how we can connect between, or get inspiration at least, between how the brain operates both from an anatomy perspective and also from a psychology perspective. And believe it or not, there's massive inspiration that we can get from the brain on how we work as an organization. One key element is data. Everybody talks about being a data-driven organization. Now, when I was at Skype, I did, my main mandate was to transform the organization to be more data-driven. As I grew older and wiser, I found out that data in itself, or the whole that notion of data-driven is wrong. We should be informed decision-making as opposed to data-driven. Because what data-driven sometimes does, it skews everything towards hard evidence, data, and whatnot, and sometimes we forget what we're born with, which is a good sense of intuition and gut feeling. And believe it or not, a gut and intuition is basically our unconscious mind recognizing patterns and telling that to our conscious mind. So a good balance is what's necessary. So in a way, what I've learned is that technology that we talk about can only be good as the people who are implementing it. People can only be as good as we let them. So the cultural elements in the organization, the environment that we put in place from leadership and below is crucial. And eventually culture is derived from leadership. So if we don't invest in that, if we don't invest in the people, then everything suffers. So when we do talk about technology, when we do talk about disruption and innovation, everything needs to be taken into consideration, not in isolation. And what people need to do nowadays, leaders and managers and employees alike, need to balance between that. Balance between the art and science multiple times a day, and that's why it's very challenging. So this is my company. So I come from Google. Obviously, we reorged about two years ago. Now we're called Alphabet. Google is just the G. And it started off as a cool research project. This is Sergey and Larry when they were younger. And what's nice about Google and the culture that they've tried to maintain as we moved through the years is sort of a scrappiness look into innovation. So not everything needs to be pitch perfect straight away. And that's why you see the first servers actually were connected with Lego bricks. And this is what Google basically looked like in '98. So we've come a long way. Nowadays, we do innovation in several fields. And what's cool about it is that it's not just a one-time hit, it's nurturing innovation, which is a critical thing. That's one thing organizations are trying to figure out. How do you make innovation programmatically as opposed to just something that happens one time and then you move on? So let's, again, baseline everyone into the disruption that we're seeing. And again, I'm going to take it from those categories that I introduced earlier, from a technology perspective, people, and business. From a tech perspective, yes, data. I did mention that intuition, but the other side of obviously is data. There's just more out there and more of it is being shared. Hence, the internet traffic is growing and continuing to grow. We're measuring everything. We're measuring ourselves in our sleep. We're measuring ourselves when we walk, everything. And all that eventually amounts to a huge set of data. Mobile is the main device, and you see the penetration. And behind those two technologies, the cloud, which is getting more and more prominence. And that's primarily where I work in currently at Google. The key word that I'd like you to understand about the cloud is abstraction. The whole idea of the cloud is to make it easier to work with technology, whether you're a consumer or an IT professional. You shouldn't care about what happens in the back end. It just needs to work properly, not just again for consumer, but for IT professionals. And obviously there's more advantages of it from cost, agility, and other elements that organizations want to deal today. So all these technologies together, mobile, cloud, primarily compute and storage, the increase of it, and data brought about the technology that has been with us for a while, and that's artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, rose back in the 50s, very sophisticated mathematical algorithms, but that's it, right? It's maths. But back then, they didn't have the computing power and obviously the storage and the amount of data that we currently have, both structured and unstructured. Anybody know the difference? So basically, unstructured data is data that we can't analyze, that comes to us with a table. Videos, photos, and all that. Machine learning is very good with that, and I guess we'll see a demonstration. Here's one demonstration of how machine learning works, and this is a neural network, which is the main way, I guess, to train an algorithm to recognize, I guess, between a cat and a dog. The deep learning notion that you hear many times is that the fact that it has multiple layers of, I guess, neurons or nodes with different mathematical weights, that every time it tests and it tries to minimize the error message, whether it's a cat or a dog. And after you train it for a while, you feed it again, an image, and eventually it should get, with a certain probability, whether it's a cat or a dog. And these algorithms get more and more sophisticated as well. New thing that came out of DeepMind, which is part of Google, is actually mimicking the voice of human in a much clearer way. This is called WaveNet. Again, it uses the same sort of algorithm or the same sort of approach, which is a neural network. Again, we're not going to go deeper into that today. And there's a few applications for it in the real world. Some of my favorites are the following. This is a project that was done between Google and Stanford University. And all it does is help to understand whether the lesions that you have are cancerous or malignant on the left-hand side or benign. And the benefit of it is twofold. First of all, people don't necessarily need to go to a physician straight away. They have a toolkit at their hands to have a first sort of examination. And second, a lot of people talk about machines replacing humans. This will not replace a human, but it will augment the physician. It has much better cognitive capabilities than any sort of doctor. Why? Because if you think of it, in order to train this algorithm, it needed to see millions of images. A physician, throughout their life cycle, their career, they would see what? 1,000, 10,000? So definitely the machine could provide a certain dimension in order to minimize, I guess, the error message or the human error in these instances. And then we use it as well to cool data centers, sort cucumbers in Japan. Obviously, translation is a big deal. And this is a cool project called Project Sunroof that tries to optimize the view of the solar systems in order to get as much solar energy as possible during different times of the day. And continuing with artificial intelligence, it's actually started or came to the public sphere through or via games. This is Garry Kasparov's famous loss back in the days. And then we had Jeopardy with IBM Watson. And just recently we had the game of Go about a year or two ago when Google's DeepMind beat Lee Sedol. The interesting part of that is Move 37, because that game was broadcasted live. We had commentators. I don't know much about it. But I do know that the algorithm made a move called Move 37 that was completely unorthodox, something that you would never do or has never been done in the game of Go for hundreds of years or maybe even thousands of years. And that actually led the algorithm to beat the human. Now, this raises the question whether there's such a thing as, I guess, machine creativity, right? Depends, I see it as depends how you define it, right? What I see as machine creativity or how the cognitive capabilities of a machine can augment humans is by the fact that they can see patterns, not like the algorithm of the cat and dog. You can unleash it on data. They can see patterns that potentially eluded us humans. We come with biases. Machines don't necessarily come with that. Some of them do. And through those patterns, they found a move that eluded us humans, and it helped them. Now, if we could apply that to other areas, from medical and healthcare, and potentially we could come closer to curing or solving any sort of problem or whatever. There's a short video, but we're not going to see that. From people's perspective, we're more urbanized, we're more social. And when it comes to the workplace, the employees changed as well. We talk about millennials, we talk about the motivation, the needs. Everything is changing, but the organizations and how we manage employees, it hasn't really changed enough. Put to that also the gig economy, and all these issues are actually coming into organizations. From a business perspective, business models have changed, and just market capitalization to see how much premium the market is paying for technology. This is 2015, the top 10 companies in terms of market cap. Amazon not even there. In 1 year, look what happened, top 5 pure tech companies. So all this is basically coming to organizations, big and small, and that's the disruption that we're seeing. I don't know how much time we have. 5 minutes, fantastic. Let's try to go through as much of this as possible. So how do you deal with all the disruption? How do you deal with technology? How do you deal with the stuff I talked about, art and science and all that? First, let's understand where the tension comes from, particularly, I guess, in large organizations. And what I see is, between innovation and cooperation. From an innovation perspective, that's what we think about when we think about innovation. But ask any sort of venture capital firm, and they will say that the idea is maybe 5% of the journey. It's the persistence and how you materialize this idea, and eventually how you programmatic create innovation in your organization, not just a one-time hit. And that's a very difficult human challenge more than anything else. Now, when you think about innovation, you think about change, non-conformity, being creative. There's almost no idea that came out of a steering committee and a huge consensus with multiple stakeholders. That doesn't happen. Sometimes you just need to go through the insurgent sort of way, create some traction, and that expand the stakeholders. And that's what you see in corporations, because corporations lack business as usual. They're bureaucratic, political sometimes, and they lack predictability. And that's where, I guess, the tension comes from. We have a face-off, innovation on the one hand and cooperation on the other hand. And that's where, I guess, the idea of disruption and digital transformation, how you change the culture in the workplace came into being. At Google, we believe that you can't force innovation, but you can create the right culture and environment for innovation, and you need to have some patience with it as well. And a few sort of items that we can go through in terms of how to work in the new digital world. One of them is Agile, focus as much as possible on the execution side and less on the planning. Again, find the right balance, and from a management perspective, we need to tame the need of managers to get to unachievable certainty. Certainty is just not possible right now, and dogfooding is one example of testing the product on employees, getting feedback, and then you can test it also on external customers as well. Lean, less has never been more important than more, if that makes any sense. Because we have so many things to do right now, how we prioritize and focus on what matters is becoming critical. Anybody know what the 2-pizza rule is? Basically, 2-pizza rule talks about, comes from Amazon, Jeff Bezos. Whenever you need more than 2 pizzas to feed a team, that team is too big. Goes again, talks about the fact that staying nimble is critical, I guess, for innovation. There he is over there. Change, I can only say that stick with organic, don't force anything on anyone. Culture is key. I think it binds everything together. And just I'll finish with culture with this sort of slide. Anybody know what this is? Frightening, right? It's basically a live cyber attack map. You've got the origin, you've got the target, and you've got the type of attacks. Now you may ask me, why am I showing this for culture? And the reason is this. Many times when you just invest in technology and not in the whole value chain, you've got disgruntled employees or unhappy employees that potentially can leave the back door open for these sort of attacks. Teams is crucial. I always say that teams is the basic unit of the organization, not the individual. And how a team operates, or the culture of the team, always more important than who's on the team. And recently there was an email that Elon Musk sent to his employees. I don't know if you heard about that. I talk a lot about culture, not just technology. And it's a real thing. So he said to his managers that the tendency to go via bureaucratic and the command chain control of organization needs to be actively fought. Those cultural elements, the negative ones, need to be actively fought. It's not just an intangible and abstract element. And sometimes it's a mindset issue, and it's way more important than a lot of those hard elements that you deal in organization. And I guess with that, I'm pretty much done, because eventually we need to balance between the art and the science, between being radical in what we propose and practical with what's possible. And there's a lot of other elements to do. And just as the late Peter Drucker said, that a lot of the challenges that we're seeing today, a lot of the solutions and the challenges that the technologies bring us today are basically human questions and not a technological question. And with that, I'm done, a little over time. Thank you.
Has anyone got any questions? I think it's amazing that you've gone from data to insight or informed data. So why do you think people are hung up? Because we were just in another panel and all they were talking about is data. And to be honest, I've been around a while. We've always collected data, even if it was in, and then we just throw it away. So why are people obsessed with data rather than insights?
It's easier.
It's easier.
Yeah, it's easier. When you deal with culture, when you deal with humans, it's much harder than you deal with worksheets or computer programs sometimes. It is. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't deal with data. Data is crucial.
Yeah.
And sometimes you've got the issue of hippos, the highest paid person's opinion, which is a negative thing. Data should always supersede that. But there needs to be a right balance. And sometimes a culture, again, it's an abstract issue. It's hard to pinpoint what are the problems are, and that makes it much harder to resolve than data.
And that means you can't do it through a process. You have to have some sort of intuition. And we've become disconnected from our...
In a way, yeah. In a way, we've skewed too much into the sort of tech area, I think at some point we'll skew back into the human, I guess, area.
Someone said if it was facts that were important, the phone book would be the best-selling book in the world.
Potentially.
Yeah.
Never heard that one.
Yeah. Thank you very much.